Greetings, YouTube friends. Today's Sunday, April 12th, 2026, and I am here with my friend KM to talk about the new moon in Aries that's taking place this week on April 17th. Hey, Cam, welcome.
Hey Margot, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. This is such an incredible new moon with all of these planets just sitting right in Aries together. It's actually almost, I wouldn't say it's unprecedented, but this many planets in Aries at one time and the luminaries hasn't happened in a long time.
Yeah, it's extraordinary and definitely something that's a highlight of 2026.
Definitely. I'm going to
Low
go
light,
ahead.
low light.
I'm going to go ahead and screen share, and we'll just get started taking a look at the chart. So there we go. So this is the chart over New York City, which is always where I take a look at the charts because I focus on financial astrology a lot of the time. So that's where the New York Stock Exchange is. And so when we look at the new moon over New York City, it's taking place at 7:51:48 a.m., just before the stock market opens at 9:30 a.m. for the New York session, actually. And the new moon will be just in the 11th house. If you kind of zoom in here, it's hard to see because these planets, they look like they're in the 12th and the 11th house, but they're not. There's just so many of them in Aries that they just are spilling over here visually with the icons. But if you take a look, you can see that they're all actually taking place. All these planets are in the 11th house over New York City. And the new moon itself is in the 11th house, but it's very cuspy. Cuspy meaning very close to the edge of the 12th house as well. So the 11th house in financial astrology rules stocks, equities, and also profits or gains in the stock market. So that's interesting to see that that's falling right on the cusp of that. And then the 12th house, which actually, interestingly, in financial astrology rules analysis. But
That's us.
yeah,
That's funny.
here we are. One of the things that really stands out to me about this new moon is that it is so tightly orbed to the Eris and Chiron. They're asteroids, and we just had an Eris Chiron conjunction, and we actually just had an Eris Chiron Venus conjunction, which was generally unfavorable for the markets and has a fairly historical pattern of being unfavorable for the markets. And so now, as the luminaries come across there, I'm seeing this as shining light, so to speak, on the energy of that conjunction that just took place. How are you seeing that?
Absolutely. I love everything that you've said there. It's hard to see in this layout, but everything in Aries is in the 11th house. And I do a lot of horary astrology, and people always think second house is money. And this is where it shows the value of having different systems for different types of astrology, that 11th house is gains. But it's not, it's a mixed bag. I mean, you have Mars and Saturn, but also the sun and moon. And I think the Chiron Eris conjunction is so interesting because I don't know how many people study Eris. It has a over 500-year orbit. So
Yep.
all of us alive, most of us, I believe, have lived only through Eris and Aries. It's that long of a transit through one sign. And Chiron conjunct Eris is not going to happen for hundreds of years again. So this is a real final or important look at the themes of Aries in our world.
I totally agree. And, I think the thing that really stands out to me about Chiron and Eris, and it's really more from a mundane perspective, as opposed to financial astrology perspective, is that, Eris is the goddess of discord, if you will, right? They're like the mythology story of her not being invited to the wedding, and she shows up and kind of crashes the wedding, right? And then Chiron is the core wound. And with all of that in Aries, it's speaking to the wound of the self, right? And so, and it's about inclusion and exclusion. And I think that operates on
Mhm.
so many different levels, whether it's collective or personal, and whether it's inclusion or exclusion. I think it's just bringing those matters, you know, to the surface right now. And I think that this new moon is really going to be shining a light on that for people personally, and then also for the collective.
Wow. Can I piggyback on that? Because that is
Yeah.
such a cool point.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about Eris most recently entered Aries in 1927. That was, after World War I, but well before World War II. And in my opinion, it's been the peak escalation of Western individualism, Western capitalism, go-it-alone energy, that Aries energy that drives so much of Western culture, economies. And if I can go even further, it's also the last 100 years or so that we've had the cross of planning in human design. And you and I have talked a little bit about this, and I don't want to go too far outside the scope, but we end a 400 plus year period in human design in February 2027.
Wow.
So one of the reasons this year is so significant in human design is it's the end of a 400 plus year, and human design calculates that based on the precession of the equinoxes. It's a separate video. Maybe we can do it someday, but at the end of this cross of planning, it's like peak capitalism. And it's, and that's really glib, and there's more nuance to it than that. But I just think it's fascinating that in the final year of this 400-year cycle, we have the Chiron-Eris conjunction, basically on this new moon. I mean, they're a degree or two away from the new moon.
Yeah, that is really powerful. That's so interesting. There's so many asteroids and bodies that we can look at, and
I know.
it's so profound. Just because they're small bodies or are minor planets or doesn't make them any less impactful, is my experience. You can take a look at as you see, I have all of these. People look at my chart and they're like, what are all those little things, right? These are just all little like asteroids and minor planets that have different correlations to different things that I track on my chart with profound precision. So anyway, I think that the Eris and Chiron conjunction, they're in tight orb to the new moon, is really the high point, I guess, or like the focal point. That's what I'm looking for. The word I'm looking for. The focal point of this new moon is really around core wounds. And you see that on the collective stage too. I mean, look at the war that's building and escalating right now. Among all the many other
wars, plural.
Plural. Absolutely. And all of this Aries energy, right? This is like, we just had Saturn Neptune in conjunction in Aries, which is a 36-year transit. And now we're getting all of the personal planets plus Mars just activating all the outer planets, Saturn and Neptune, as well as the degree where that conjunction took place. This is a really active period of time. Yeah.
I just want to say this because I think it's really interesting that the new moon is happening at the end of Aries with that cluster of Chiron and Eris. But then we have this whole other story happening at 0, 1, 2, 5 degrees of Aries as well. And my theory is that we're healing something about the latter stages of Aries to begin an entirely new cycle. And that 0 degrees Aries conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in February, that hadn't happened for 6,300 years. And obviously we can't, think about that scale in a new moon video, but I just think we're also building something new and fresh. And I just keep reminding people, I have this platform called the Weekly Stars. I keep trying to remind people there's an optimism here too, because if you look just at the news, it's scary and pretty hopeless. But if you think about where do you have some passion or desire for a new beginning, can you focus on that part of Aries? Can you focus on Mars cutting through the fog? Mars and Neptune are in the sky right now. And sure, Neptune is absolutely deceptive, illusory. I've been fooled by it many times, but can Mars also cut through the fog right now and provide some light? It's in a very powerful place there. So not to, try to do toxic positivity or something, but I do think there's an important duality to this new moon as well with the early Aries and the late Aries. Do you see that
I do see that. And, I actually titled my 2026 forecast book, the theme for the year is ignition, activation, and expansion, right? And I feel like we're in the ignition and activation phase, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, very acutely, maybe the most acute ignition and activation phase of the whole year, really, is what's transpiring. And I do totally see that. And I think it's fascinating if we look at the orbs of the different planets. We also have Uranus sitting at 29 degrees Taurus,
Right.
which is, the 30-degree aspect is called a bisextile, right? The sextile being the 60-degree aspect. And what's interesting about the 30-degree aspect is the way I've heard it described that I really like to share with people is when you're really close to someone, you don't always see them that well, right? Like you can have there can be powerful communication between you because you're so close, and even your energy can pass back and forth, but you have to turn your head to look to see when someone's right next to you,
Yeah, it's in your peripheral.
Yeah. And
I
so
love, I call it the semi-sextile, and I love that aspect.
yeah, it's that. So that's notable to me is that we've got Uranus about to move into Gemini for, the first time in 84 years. Well, the final time for this cycle, this 84-year cycle, right? Because we had a little taste of it last year when it transitioned in and then retrograded back out. But Uranus has been activated in the new moon chart for, gosh, ever since last year, because the new moons have been in the late degrees of each sign, right? And so Uranus has also been in the late degrees of Taurus. So we've been getting various different aspects of Uranus involved in each new moon. And so this one is interesting to me because the new moon is so close to Uranus in this case. And, I also wanted to share, I love the Sabian symbols, which is work by Dr. Mark Edmund Jones. And for each degree of the zodiac, he channeled energy or meaning for each degree. And what really stood out to me is that this degree of the new moon is considered the theme. What he wrote is a large disappointed audience. And
Okay.
I thought that was really interesting. The key word is disjunction. When positive, the degree is complete spiritual independence. And when negative, it's a destructive assimilation of the self to every defeat or frustration of humankind. Right?
Wow.
Super powerful and so perfectly linking back to Chiron and Aries right there too. But also what really stands out to me about this is that this doesn't look super favorable to me as from a financial astrology perspective. Interestingly, let's see which this is a minor planet called minor planet Swan. And there's a friend of mine, Sandy Nelson, and I can put a link in the video description below. She does work with these minor planets and asteroids. And she created a set of, she studied a set of asteroids that she calls the crash set. And I'm not saying we're going to have a market crash. I'm just saying this is one of those asteroids in that set that she kind of went back through history and found were interestingly aspected at major points of drawdowns in the stock market. And I'm definitely not saying that I'm expecting a crash on this new moon. I'm pointing out that it's interesting that it's square within 1 degree actually of minor planet Swan. It's also square within 2 degrees to minor planet Gold. And Gold is quite literally, it's the asteroid that rules gold. And it's fascinating. We could actually jump into the gold chart real quick if you want to take a look at it on the gold chart.
Before you do that, can I ask a follow-up? Because I love what you're saying there. I mean, I'm expecting a drawdown into this new moon.
Yeah.
And based on other, we've talked about your analogs and whatnot. And tell me what you think about this. When I saw all of the Aries energy in the 11th house, but clustered in the early and the later, like I talked about, I feel like something is ending and something new is beginning. And that's what gives me hope is that personally, obviously no financial advice, I think this is a really interesting time to buy if we do get this drawdown because something hopeful and new and fresh seems to be starting as well. And, that may not last long. It might just be this 28-day lunar cycle, but I think it's really interesting that it's the later degrees, the actual new moon that's squaring Gold and Swan. Mm-hmm. And then the new fresher part, yes, it's Neptune, there's illusions and Saturn and Mars, but I do think that there's a new story starting as well. And I think with all of that in the 11th house of gains and stocks and equities, I think that some are going to be shown the door and some are going to have a new start.
Yeah, I like that interpretation. I think, when I look at the 11th house and I look at this moon, so that's the ruler of this new moon is Mars, right? And Mars is afflicted at the moment, even though it's domiciled in the sign of Aries, it's tightly orbed to Saturn, and Saturn has this tendency to kind of,
Right.
Restrict Mars action, right? So I think that what I'm seeing is like we may have a little bit of a hard time getting going. It's like you're talking about kind of like a fresh start here. I love that idea. And it feels like a fresh start that maybe is going to be like a kind of like a start stop, kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of feeling,
Restrained, limited, all the Saturn themes.
Well, and
yeah, because you.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Well, we just know that Saturn, Mars is the gas and the brakes pedal at the same time. And so if you try to push both too hard, it's going to be incredible, bad or difficult internal tension. But if you are expecting those delays, if you're expecting that slow start, I think it'll naturally happen. And the idea for me, the way I'm feeling it is all this Aries energy is so brave and fiery. We know something's going to happen. Why rush it? Why lean into the impatience of Saturn and Aries? And maybe I'm talking too mundane astrology here rather than financial, but I think you're spot on to see that new start. I can be too optimistic there, but we know there's going to be restrictions. 2 days later, Saturn and Mars meet up.
Well, that was exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say, I think it's exemplified by the fact that we have that triple conjunction, actually.
Right. Right.
Which actually, that triple conjunction is the tightest orb in the shortest period of time that those 3 planets, Mercury, Mars, and Saturn, have been in since 1900.
Wow.
They come into that orb of conjunction, where it's not an exact triple conjunction. So technically, maybe my language isn't appropriate, but I'm going to go ahead and roll with it, because this time, which it isn't always like this, a lot of times they're at different degrees, right? So
it's the same degree.
It's the same degree. It's not the exact same arc minute, but it's the same degree. That is a really unique moment. And so this is almost hard to forecast, right? Because you don't have any historical correlations to really compare it to in this at least in this century. I don't, in this tight of an orb here. But when they are all tightly orbed there, it is going to be during the Mars-Saturn conjunction. First is the Mars-Saturn conjunction, and then just shortly after, let's see how many hours after. Oops, that's Uranus. Oops. I think I didn't have it pulled up. I thought I had it pulled up. But it's just a few hours later then that you have the Mercury-Mars and then Mercury-Saturn conjunction as well, to the exact arc minute. But what did stand out to me here is that this is all happening in the 6th house. Just about what's the descendant degree there? The descendant degree is 19. The descendant representing the sellers, right? So this is the 6th house being the house of, work, service and work, hard work, right? So it's interesting to me that this is taking place there. And then we could also talk about Hygeia, which is kind of a deviation from our conversation at the moment. But Hygeia is the asteroid of health and wellness. And I have noticed that Hygeia has been heavily aspected multiple times in the last couple months. And, I think public health matters certainly are something that I'm aware of and keeping a close track of, because we're also headed towards, in August, a Jupiter Hygeia conjunction that definitely has a correlation to public health crises, we could call it, or small epidemics, not COVID crisis style situations, but other like the Zika virus and such. So that's definitely a very real possibility of something that we could see emerge this year.
Yeah, and also the 6th house is the mechanics of production. Mm-hmm. And what are we seeing right now? But we're seeing literal oil production facilities bombed or destroyed or impacted, slowed down. I think that could definitely be part of this, especially with, I think that there could be some benefit, maybe this is too optimistic, of Saturn restraining Mars a little bit and maybe put some restraint on this, escalating fog of war. But it will certainly also slow down, everything that's trying to move forward, including perhaps shipping. I know sixth house isn't shipping necessarily, but I wanted to quickly go back to the new moon. I think
Oh,
it's
yeah.
so fascinating that you pull this chart up real quick.
Yeah.
But one of the things I love about what you were saying about the slowness or like the delayed start is what happens right after the new moon. We get that Mars, Saturn, Mercury triple conjunction.
Yep.
Then we get Taurus season, which is stabilizing but slow. Taurus is one of the slower signs. It's very earthy, grounded, stubborn. And then a few days after that, we have Sun square Pluto and Uranus entering Gemini on the same day. And so that could also maybe disrupt the new start. And look at this new, I almost couldn't, I like to use equal sign when we work together. And so I said, wait, this isn't clicking. Oh, because the ascendant of this new moon over New York is 0 degrees Gemini.
Yeah.
And so that will be activated. That new moon degree in New York, the financial market center for the US, will be activated 8 days later on April 25th when Uranus crosses it.
Absolutely. And so, bringing the matters of Uranus, which are disruption, unexpected events, right? Technology, innovation. Maybe on the light side of Uranus and Gemini, I'm definitely looking for certain innovative tech companies may get a boost out of that. But also, I think it's for technology in general, because Uranus is somewhat disruptive, especially when it makes its transition into a new sign, right? So we may see some erratic behavior in the markets, but this is definitely a very volatile period. I was calling this last week of, or not last week, but basically kind of beginning around the 16th, 17th, the new moon, and then lasting through the Uranus ingress into Gemini is kind of like it's like a April vortex of energy. That I expect to see quite a bit of volatility in the financial markets and probably just in our personal lives as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I know we talk about the new moon, but I do think it's helpful to think about the full moon that follows. So the full moon in Scorpio to me could be the moment where all this energy culminates, even though it's in a different sign. Because we just have so much. That Aries vortex that's a great wording for it, with the triple conjunction, Pluto square Sun, Uranus ingress, and it all culminates, not all, but there's a culmination event on May 1st, which is a Scorpio full moon.
Here it is.
And that full moon, I have it pulled up, but is a Leo rising chart at 25, right on Donald Trump's Mars, puts all that Aries energy in the ninth house. So it's going to be an interesting couple weeks. I think some sort of V shape by the dip, like April 2025, doesn't seem entirely likely, but
yeah.
I mean, look at last week's move up. Those are really big moves up.
That was quite literally a V-shaped bounce last week. So, but on the topic of the U.S. equity markets, we haven't confirmed our daily uptrend yet. So I feel like that's what's on deck for this week. Is can the U.S. equity markets confirm a daily uptrend? What is that going to look like? And I really do think we're going to see a lot of volatility over the next 1 to 2 weeks as we kind of shake this out. I would say my personal bias is that the U.S. equity markets, we will potentially see a move up into the summer, but where we peak out before, potentially seeing some more significant drawdowns in Q3, Q4. But we'll see if that's what shakes out, right? This new moon chart, though, it doesn't. When I look at this new moon chart, even though it's in the 11th house, which is the house of gains or the house of stocks and equities, it's in the late degrees. It's on the cusp of the 12th house, and it doesn't say to me huge gains. That's not what this new moon says to me, particularly because it's also opposite Spica, fixed star Spica. Which is the fixed star most closely correlated to wealth and abundance, right? It more so seems like some profit taking may take place, and then having to analyze and work for it. to build that base of support and maybe move on up from there. That's kind of my, at least in the first couple weeks of the new moon.
Yeah, I mean, would you say this is fair that right now we're looking to see whether this new moon will translate as a higher low or not? And that's kind of like what we're looking to see over the next couple weeks.
I would totally agree.
That's personally what I'm doing.
I would, yeah, me too. And I mean, we've talked all about the stock charts. So let me just grab a technical analysis chart real quick, and we'll just let's see.
I'm always proud, Margot, when I'm not entirely off, because I'm always trying to learn from you. So that's great.
Oh, you are definitely not entirely off. You are so on point. I always love talking to you about this stuff. Here, let's use the Dow Jones is what I've got as I've got my analogs open here. There we go. Okay, so the orange analog is what I've been tracking, and it's been so precise. The blue one is a longer term, higher time frame cycle that I'm keeping an eye on. It's not been tracking tick for tick by any means, but overall structure and direction is okay. And then the green is the Venus analog. All of them point to a move up into the summer. Now, what I always say when I'm looking at the financial markets and when I'm trading, when I'm forecasting, is I'm like, okay, this is my most likely scenario. So that's my most likely scenario. I've been looking for potentially a double bottom here, which may or may not happen. After the size of this move up, we may end up, just like you said, making a higher low, which would be the ideal situation for the bulls in all reality, right?
Right.
But how would we know if it was going to fail? Right? That's what I like to look at and know. And for me, this low right here, which is on the Dow Jones Industrial Average Index, 45,063.33, that low is key, which I also want to point out, since we're talking about technical analysis real quick, there is nothing that like says bearish anything to me about this at the moment from a price action standpoint. We hit weekly oversold here, and we bounced off the 382 retracement from the April 7th low. That is by definition what you would look for continuation, unless we were to lose the low there. So that low of weekly support is just like the line in the sand, right? If we lose that level, then my bullish thesis might be wrong. But right now, that's my outlook on the U.S. equity markets. And you can see I use these tags are cycle measurements of planetary cycles, and they typically indicate pivots. And when they cluster together, they indicate periods of volatility. And we've got one this week and one next week, which typically indicates a period of volatility, which supports our new moon story that we're looking at.
Yeah. And can you go quickly back to that real quick? Just because, famous last words that anything is easy in a technical analysis. But what I like about this is you can wait. You can say, okay, I'm going to see if it breaks that line, then maybe this analog inverts and it's not worth getting in, that 382 retracement. But if it does bounce off of that again, or if it's a higher low, what a great opportunity to trade into the summer. And for me, that's crystal clear compared to the fog that we've been in with Mercury retrograde last month, Mercury in Pisces until Tuesday. For me, it's a more clear path than we've had in months, honestly. But famous last words, perhaps.
Well, it is clear, and if we take a look at what we anticipate here on the analog is that we'll see what this drawdown build. We have plenty of room for a higher low now. That's the thing about a bounce like that, right? If we let's hide this other one real quick. So, if the top is in, which it may not be, but I think we're close. I expect to see a daily pivot high by Monday or Tuesday of this week. So if the top is in, then we just gauge the drawdown, right? If we hold above 47,000, that's a classic 382 retracement, and that's bullish. But if we draw down more, then it's like, this range is so big, we could make a tightening range. We could see some volatility in there over the next couple of weeks, So
right.
Yeah, that's the overall take on the US equity markets is the charts match the charts.
Yeah, it sure does. Do you want to take a look at any astro mapping, or
I would love to.
Would you want to do some?
Yeah, let me stop my screen share and you can start yours.
Okay, 1 second. So I was sharing on Twitter and my other platforms some maps because it's really extraordinary what's happening this weekend. You and I are recording in the middle. Let me just share real quick. You and I are recording. There we go. Is it showing Astro Gold?
Yep.
And then now is it showing the map as well?
Yep. Perfect.
So this weekend, you and I are recording literally on the Mars Neptune, and a few hours from now, it's going to be Venus sextile Jupiter, which is a really harmonious aspect. And if you're interested in what that was connected to with the ongoing peace talks, it was so focused on the Middle East, Iran, the Strait of Hormuz. It was incredible. And I almost couldn't believe it. And, hours earlier today, or maybe last night, they announced that the peace talks had broken down, which would be right on point for Mars Neptune. This is the map for the new moon, though. So we want to look here and always remember that this is a lot which is dependent on the New York location. So let's not focus on that right now. But this is Vesta. This is an asteroid of investment, of everything that is physical. I really connected a lot to real estate, commodities, physical investments. It has a big connection to Virgo, maybe not as much as some of the other asteroids, but it is literally, the term Vesta is in investment. And this is on the DC throughout this region. Not exactly on the Strait of Hormuz, but pretty close. And so maybe there's something about sellers benefiting from that placement there. Otherwise, the region doesn't have a lot. You can see it's all the way over in Pakistan, where there's Neptune and Mercury and Hygeia, and also Saturn and Mars, which are going to be approaching after this new moon. And we know that peace talks have been happening in Pakistan, so maybe that just shows Pakistan's highlighted role. But the way I interpret this is that this new moon could almost be the quiet before the storm of Mars-Saturn. But I don't know. You tell me what you think.
Well, that's interesting. I'm noticing it looks like it goes through. Does it go through? No, that's Mars going through Mumbai. Does it go through part of India? The new moon?
Which aspect? Sorry.
The new moon. Sorry. Oh, no. Oh, that's not the new moon.
No, the new moon is actually over here. So obviously, this is only mapping the angles. So this is the new moon on the DC, on the descendant.
Got it.
Going through Western China, Myanmar, and the Indian Ocean. If we go over to the US, look at this. Pluto straight through the eastern seaboard.
Wow.
I mean, that is intense for me. That's right on the MC, pretty close, definitely within an orb. That's a 50-mile orb, well within an orb that we would study. And an aspect with Uranus on the AC, right there. Because whenever the two planet lines cross, you know that they're making a hard aspect, a square, or an opposition.
Oh, that's interesting. And that's over New York City, as well as how far was Washington, D.C. from there? Oh, no, Washington, D.C. is a little further away. That's over New York.
Yeah, and look at that. Washington has the part of fortune. Now, reminder, the part of fortune is calculated based on the ascendant. So this is the part of fortune from New York's perspective. But it's interesting that it's over Washington.
It is interesting that it's over Washington.
For all things, which might just show that there's some money to be made from what's going on in Washington. I think that's always important. And if we go over to Europe, you can see that also France seems to be really involved. Maybe Eastern Spain as well, London, all have it, in pretty close orb there with Chiron as well.
Yeah,
so,
that's very interesting.
Yeah, I wonder what else I was going to pull up really quickly the Mars-Saturn conjunction, since that happens right afterwards. But were you surprised to see a lack of activity in that region in the Middle East?
Not particularly. Obviously it's a hotbed of activity in general. And I think if I recall I guess now that it's not up there, it looked like there was. I
can switch it.
Oh yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah, let's see. Zoom out, because I was thinking about, because I forecast the Indian stock market, Nifty too, and honestly, that was something that kind of had my, like, that's what I was thinking about, I guess, when I was looking at this, right? And the Indian stock market just made a massive recovery off of a major monthly support. It's been in a period of consolidation for quite a few months. So that was interesting.
Look at that. Mars
Yeah,
going straight through Mumbai on the descendant. So
yeah,
that is interesting
that
for the
is very
Nifty.
interesting for the Nifty. And then when you get that Mars Saturn conjunction, where does that take place over there?
So then it moves over. The Mars Saturn conjunction has now moved over closer
Okay.
to Bangladesh. You now have Vesta in Western India. But look at this. You now have the moon coming over this part of the world. We're after the new moon. Sorry, we're 2 days later on the Saturn Mars conjunction. But look at this North Node right over Pakistan.
Hmm.
I think that's Pakistan, the border of Pakistan and Iran, yeah, and Afghanistan. And then we also have Pluto coming over here, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Uranus. It seems to me like there's going to be something that's a little surprising about the the Saturn Mars conjunction and how it plays out in this region.
Well, it's certainly worth noting that, at 7 degrees of Aries, that is a 2 degree orb sextile to
Mm-hmm.
Pluto at 5 degrees of
Mm-hmm.
Aquarius right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Mars Pluto matters are certainly matters of intensity, major action oriented drive or situations to kind of, I always think of like alchemy, like tear it down first to build
Yeah.
it back up, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what I think of when I think of Mars Saturn or Mars Pluto aspects. And then, yeah, Saturn Pluto, we just came off that Saturn Pluto sextile. And that was fascinating because, the first outbreak of COVID in 2020 took place very close to the Saturn Pluto conjunction there that took place in January of
Right.
2020. And so then, of course, what we start seeing, there was some new variant that surfaced literally like within days of the Pluto Saturn sextile. Um,
Right. Right.
you know, so interesting stuff for sure.
And actually, speaking of COVID, one of the favorite ways I like to explain, I know it sounds intense, but Saturn Mars started the COVID cycle in March 2020. The real public culmination of it. Obviously, I know it was
Hmm.
around before then. And each hard aspect it made, square, opposition, secondary conjunction, was a new step in the COVID crisis. So first it was the Delta variant, then it was Omicron, and each was on a hard or like a square in opposition. Have we talked about that before?
No, of the Saturn Pluto
It's
cycle, right?
Yeah,
Oh, so wait,
and no,
Saturn Pluto
no,
or
this was for
Saturn?
Saturn
Sorry,
Mars.
Saturn
So
Mars. Yeah.
yeah, so Saturn Mars was in March 2020, and then I think later that summer it was Saturn Mars square, and that was on the Delta. And by the time it got to the Saturn Mars opposition was Omicron in late 2021. And then it wasn't until the second conjunction in Aquarius that mask mandates and other COVID era changes were lifted when they
Hmm.
had the second conjunction in Aquarius. We're only getting one in Aries, which again is what this map shows you. But I'm raising that all to say this is starting an important 2 year cycle. So to have Pluto here, to have Uranus there on this cycle, to have the North Node is interesting. And again, let's go back to the US and notice there's Jupiter there, which is
Mm.
really fascinating to me. And,
Oh, look,
also
it's
Chiron
going through.
off.
Oh, sorry, I totally interrupted
No,
you.
no, no, please.
It's going straight through Cuba. Jupiter
Yeah, and
is.
also West Palm Beach.
That's
Yeah, so
interesting.
I don't know. Maybe this is I want it's thank you for raising that because Cuba's really been lost in the news of, there's so much going on and they've basically been without oil for weeks now. Not basically, they have been. And just recently, the US allowed some ships in, but it's a growing humanitarian crisis, ongoing blackouts. I don't know. Does Jupiter amplify the problem, or since it's in Cancer, does it help alleviate this? This is the MC.
Well,
It's
what
very
I think
interesting.
of with Jupiter and Cancer, I think of, United States military action and defense, actually. Defense of the homeland is really, a very Cancerian matter on the political stage. And to
Yeah.
see Jupiter through Cuba, it just makes me think of all those comments that we've heard Donald Trump make about, taking over, a friendly takeover of Cuba, I think is
Yeah.
what he
He can do
called it.
whatever he wants.
Yeah, yeah, unbelievable. But with Jupiter through there, and Jupiter's in Cancer right now. I think that's interesting to note. And I don't have anything prepared, but just talking about this, it would be interesting to take a look at like the Cuban Missile Crisis or like various other Cuba events and see if there was any correlation to Jupiter and Cancer or not. I don't know if there is.
Yeah, look, this is back to the new moon map.
Yeah.
I could probably pull up that chart, but this is the new moon 2 days before. And it's
Pluto.
interesting that Pluto's right there, and then 2 days later, Jupiter. So seems like it will be really activated. I think that's smart. I could pull up the Cuban Missile Crisis, but we should probably have more prepared thoughts on that. I look at the activation here. Look at how all of these planets are over the US right now. This doesn't have to be the case,
Yeah,
you know,
that's a lot of activity. And look, is
on
that
the
the new
new
moon?
moon.
Is that the new moon right there? If you go back to the United States?
Yeah, this is the new moon over the ascendant.
Okay.
So remember, each of the new moons has,
Yep.
one of the angles, and it's exact down here, quite further south, which would create a latitudinal line through the middle of South America. But you can see them separating over the U.S. But yeah, this is the ascendant line that they're
Wow.
both on.
There's just so much activation there going all through so many places in the United States, but there's a lot of concentration both on the East Coast and then kind of the, I don't know, Southwest middle, not quite the Midwest, a little bit of activation in the Midwest. It's really a lot more like Utah, Colorado, Idaho area and down through.
Yeah, and then the north node off the coast of the west, off the west coast is really interesting to me. Is this some really important, fateful, karmic change or next step forward for tech? And tech is way down. And actually, maybe this would be an interesting pivot. I could pull up NVIDIA's chart if you don't have it, but you and I were talking about how this new moon is exactly conjunct NVIDIA's Saturn. And I feel like that would be an interesting chart to look at in conclusion. Do you want me to pull it up?
Oh,
Or
sure. If you've got it, go ahead.
you have it?
I do have it, but if you want to pull it up,
No, go ahead if you have it, because
Okay.
I don't need to astro map it necessarily. But
let's see.
I thought that was really interesting given that north node right there on the West Coast where all these companies are based.
That is interesting. My take on Nvidia right now is that it looks like it's going to have a trade in a range for the next few months, like through August. Let's put the new moon on there.
Yeah, and that to me, I'm like, is that because, so it has a natal Saturn-Mars opposition, which will be activated by this new moon.
Yeah.
So maybe that range comes from the fact that the new moon is emphasizing that push-pull of Saturn-Mars.
Yeah, well, it's square to the natal sun too, right? So we've got the opposition to Mars and square to the sun, even though it happens to fall in the second house. Let's see, who's the ruler? Oh, interesting. So that with that natal Saturn in Aries, Saturn's in its fall there on the natal
Yeah,
chart.
Mars is in its fall too, or Mars is in its detriment
Yeah, that's very
in the
interesting.
natal chart.
Let's see. And then also I know we're not quite there, but then on the new moon, you've got Saturn, Neptune, and Mars activating the natal NVIDIA moon. And, the moon is how the public perception, right?
Yeah.
So that's super interesting. Maybe there'll be some news around the public perception. But certainly the new moon, what is this asteroid? Let's see. Oh, interesting. That's NVIDIA's natal Satoshi. Yeah.
I think I know you have it. What did you say, that it's going to be in a tight orb, or it's going to be not volatile? But here's my thought. I think maybe NVIDIA loses its leadership, like that Neptune on the moon makes some illusions about it, or it's just a time where things switch. This is complete guess, but that there's a switch to maybe smaller cap. Semis, I don't know. I don't think we're going to,
like
there's going to have to be some news about NVIDIA with that new moon so tightly conjunct Saturn and Mars in the natal chart.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, I think if you look at this, the analog that I've run that goes through August. That's run a little late. It actually only goes through August 15th. So let's pull it back. So let's see if I can grab it. There we go. And make sure it's positioned right there. Yeah, so that is what I'm seeing. And so really this green one is what we can actually eliminate this one. When I ran these, I wasn't sure which one was trading out. So, that is bullish, right? It's like this suggests that we would get that higher low we've talked about. And then, that's tradable for sure. I'm not sure that it's going to make new all-time highs, though, necessarily. Remember, the analogs don't forecast price, though. They're just structure and direction. So that is a bullish analog, but it's pretty choppy, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Are there any events coming up that could invert analogs? I guess we have the bending of the nodes in Gemini season, but
Yeah, that's
um,
the biggest one is the bending of the nodes. And honestly, you know why that one really stands out to me? I don't have that chart prepped, but it's because Uranus is just in a couple degrees away from being at
right,
the bending of the nodes. So
right.
sun square the nodes is the midpoint
Hmm.
between eclipse seasons, and that is typically it doesn't typically invert eclipse or analogs. It can, but it doesn't typically invert them completely. What I most often see is during that 7 to 10 day period, I see deviations, or maybe it flips and then flips back on the analog. But
Yeah,
but I actually have really flagged that period of time as like high volatility analog inversion risk because Uranus is so close to being at the bending of the nodes here. Let me just, since we're talking about it, I'll just grab it
yeah.
and
I have it too if you want me to show it,
oh
but
yeah,
do you
if
have
you
it
have
pulled
it
up?
prepped, go ahead and pull it up.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting because it is so close to, okay, you seen it now?
Yep.
So this is the sun square the nodes. We can do Uranus square the nodes later. But
Mm,
look at that. This is over New York.
yeah.
I use whole signs, so the moon is in the first house. I can change that. But I also thought it was really interesting that the part of fortune is, well, now it's in the fourth house in equal sign. But look at that. It's at 23 Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a, in conjunct aspect to Jupiter and pretty close, within a degree. So it's an interesting day for me.
Yeah, that's definitely it's an interesting time period because I think it's just a little bit later into June than like when we get the Uranus square the nodes. And
Yeah, let me pull
actually,
that up.
there's a really great book that I read. I'm trying to think of what it's called. Moon Wobbles. I have it around here somewhere.
Yeah, I got that based on your recommendation. It's fantastic.
It
It's such a good book.
it's really amazing because they go through it's got Carl Payne Toby's research in it, and it goes through the actual studies they've done on moon wobbles, or eclipses and sun square the node events. And when Uranus is involved, man, there are very strong historical patterns correlated to natural disasters, fires, really powerful unexpected events. And I don't like to forecast doom and gloom. We could leave room possibility for it to be something positive,
No, but I've looked a lot. I always have a fascination with how Uranus triggers tsunamis and earthquakes because I was in a really large earthquake in the 90s, and it's just fascinating how much that time period is one to watch out. Not something to fear, but how here's the chart. Look at that. So it's at 2 degrees Gemini when the nodes are going to be at 2 degrees Pisces and Virgo. And we also have Mars in Taurus, pretty close to the moon in Taurus, the sign of
mm-hmm.
Earth.
Yep.
Mars is in its fall in Taurus. Sorry, in its detriment. I keep saying that wrong.
Yep.
So I don't know. Sun conjunct within a couple degrees, the part of fortune. It's an interesting chart to me.
That is an interesting chart. And Ceres is just tightly orbed there to Uranus.
Hmm.
And that makes me think that there may be some agriculture involved. Um,
Yes.
that's very interesting. And then of course we have to think about Gemini matters too, right? Early degrees of Gemini, things that I think of, obviously AI, but also like self-driving cars There's like some kind, like maybe there's like, because the square is also manifestation. It's like having to work hard to also to bring something into fruition. So while it could be natural disasters and that sort of thing, we could also, like, from a totally different perspective, be looking for news events, or the revealing of maybe long time coming technological innovations.
Yeah, I mean, what if it's a metaphorical earthquake of a tech innovation that leads us into the Uranus trine Pluto in July? I think you're smart to look at this, because even though I think Taurus season is going to help ground us a bit, and there's some optimism in June with, look, we're only 2 days out, 3 days after Venus Jupiter conjunction on June 9th, but this is a day I'm watching for sure. And look at that Ceres. So Ceres is an asteroid that is connected a lot to the harvest. It has Saturnian qualities of it. And there's even been proposal by a lot of modern astrologers that it be the modern ruler of Virgo. And so you think about those Virgo themes and the harvest and agriculture, which there was actually an astro mapping of that I wanted us to look at. But you have the agriculture the lot of agriculture up here. It's within 3 degrees of the midheaven. But Ceres is trining to the degree Pluto retrograde.
Oh, wow. That is
Let's look at the
notable.
map at that.
Yeah, definitely.
Why don't
And you
we?
know what I think of when I think of Gemini? In Chinese astrology, Gemini season is ruled by the snake, or sorry, I'm saying that wrong. In Chinese astrology, the snake correlates to Gemini season. That's how I was trying to phrase that. And the shadow, Gemini expression is, one way and then the other. I mean, I would say a perfect shadow Gemini expression is the, Trump taco, right? Like,
Yeah,
first one way
yeah.
and then the other. And that's really also, if you think of how a snake moves, right? A snake goes side to side. It doesn't move in a straight line. And so I think that may be the impact that we end up seeing on technology and maybe agriculture with Ceres in Gemini as well. They're tightly orbed to Uranus.
Yeah, and look at this, because you and I have talked a lot about the long-term play of some agriculture investments, given their dependence on fertilizer and oil. And it's one of many commodities that will be affected by oil prices in the long run. This is the exact day of Uranus square the nodes, and Uranus is on the midheaven through the region, and so is Ceres. So that's really interesting to me. And the North Node is over there. We could see this is from the perspective of New York, but you have Mars over there. You do have the moon, interestingly, going pretty close to Washington, D.C. And then if we want to look over at the tech world, once again, we see the North Node crossing the West Coast. It's, further south this time than the last one we looked at. And that is also another series line over here. Can you see these pop-ups when I'm clicking
Yeah,
them?
yeah, I do see the
Yeah.
pop-ups. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so this is Ceres on the IC over off the West Coast, and Pluto as well, which isn't a great sign, but yeah, interesting. Lots and
Interesting
lots to think
today.
about.
Not This is not for the future event, but we have talked a little bit about seeing this activation on the West Coast and off the West Coast shoreline. I just saw a post by Stefan Burns, who I follow on Twitter, who's a geophysicist, that there's been a swarm of magnitude 9 earthquakes off the coast of Washington and Oregon in the ocean. It's interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting to think that Uranus is leaving the sign of Earth for 84 years, and it's going to be entering the sign of air, climate, and transportation. So I guess we're getting a little ahead of ourselves from this new moon, but it's fascinating to think. And I do think it's important to keep in mind the bending of the nodes, because it's happening, pretty close to the next new moon, which is going to be in Taurus.
Yeah. I mean, I love the new moon videos as an opportunity to look at not just the new moon itself, but what we think is coming down the pipeline during the lunar cycle and then beyond, because I think everything is all interrelated, and so this has been fascinating to unpack all this with you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Always so fun to chat with you, and thanks for your expertise.
Yeah, thanks. Do you want to tell the viewers where they can find you?
Yeah, Substack, Patreon, X. I'm at the Weekly Stars on all those platforms, and look forward to seeing how the next couple weeks play out. It's going to be a really consequential couple weeks.
I agree. I think there's going to be a lot of things unfolding over the next couple weeks. So stay grounded, everyone.
Yeah.
That's
Use that Venus and Taurus energy when the
yes.
sun enters Taurus on April 20th. Use that to ground. Here's what I want to say, because I do think there's going to be some moments. We came so close to the brink when we had a president tweeting about the destruction of an entire civilization
Yeah,
on what was the aspect of that? That was Sun square Jupiter.
it was. Yep.
Big energy, big words. And you said it best. You said, but things may not be what they seem.
Yep.
And I would tell people, this is what I've been telling my followers, if we feel like we approach the brink again before this ceasefire ends on the 21st, remember we have some grounding energy of Taurus coming up. We have some lighter Gemini energy. We do have some moments that will get us out of this intense Aries pileup, but it is a consequential couple weeks. And maybe what's meant to happen is going to happen so that we can start to move forward finally once that Saturn separates.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, it makes me think of one thing too. On the New York Stock Exchange natal chart, it has Mercury conjunct fixed star algol, which is about losing your head. And for anybody who follows me regularly, you've heard me talk about this. But I think that's correlated to how people, lose their heads quite literally in the financial market and their accounts as well sometimes. But the counterbalance to that is actually Venus. And without having the charts and going into depth here, Venus is positively aspected there. And so I feel like that's almost the same kind of thing that's going on right now, right? We've got a really charged, fired up Mercury in Aries, Mars in Aries, Saturn, Neptune, Sun, Moon. It's like Venus is kind of like the safe haven right now. It's like, can you consciously choose to step back and like choose to embrace that Venus energy, as an antidote almost, right?
That's, it's so funny. That's how I'm ending my weekly update this week, is reminding people that at the end of the next couple weeks, we have Venus conjunct Uranus in Taurus for the last time.
Yes.
And I think that will feel like a breakthrough moment, like something shifting, like we can work with that really beneficial Venus and Taurus energy to move on. So thank you. That's such a good reminder that in the middle of this Aries chaos, we're lucky enough to have Venus in its home sign,
Yes, absolutely. There's a reprieve there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been so great. I look forward to the next one already. It's a very Aries take, right?
Yeah. I already have the new moon in Taurus pulled up, so we're ready to go. We'll see what happens in the next week or next month.
Yep. If anybody would like to connect with me, I do have a Discord, and there'll be a link in the video descriptions below. I forecast the U.S. equity markets and Bitcoin and the Indian stock market, Nifty, gold and silver on a biweekly basis, and provide a lot of other a monthly webinar and all kinds of fascinating and interesting information. All my research in real time. So you can join there if you're interested. Also, I do individualized astrology ratings, which you can book through my website, margotamala.com. And that's a wrap. Thanks, everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Bye, Margot.
Bye.